So I'm going to work under the assumption that everyone can hear me. Otherwise, Winston could tell me there's something wrong. No news is good news.
Okay, why don't we
I see different faces coming in, which is very reassuring. Yes, loud and clear. Jai. Okay. Om Jnana Timiranda Shajananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militan Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I'm getting a message from Sikandar Prabhu, but I think I was supposed to give an introduction. All right. Well, is there still time for a brief introduction from
Yes.
Don't use the updated version of the what was announced.
Yes.
Go right ahead. I can't hear you, but
Hare Krishna.
I don't know. I don't know if my video is on or not. Now it's cool. Okay. So I can't hear you, but I'll see if I can read your lips.
Hare Krishna.
Don't say anything bad about me.
We'd like to welcome all of you here today, who have taken the time, even during these trying times in Texas. You have taken time to come to this program. That is really appreciated, greatly appreciated. So today we have in our presence a very august person, a very saintly person, somebody who's dedicated his life to spreading the Krishna consciousness movement, even at a very advanced age and with so many challenges. Maharaj is still continuing to do that. So I would like to welcome His Holiness Bhakti Prabhupada-Vrata Damodara Swami. So I'll give you an introduction here about Maharaj. The original posting in the program, there was some little errors there. Maharaj wanted me to send a more updated version. Maharaj is one of Srila Prabhupada's first followers, going back to July of 1966. And finally becoming initiated in 1975. His Holiness Bhakti Prabhupada-Vrata Damodara Swami first met his divine grace in the 60s in New York City on 22nd Avenue, where he was a regular visitor. In those days, one had very easy access to speak directly with Srila Prabhupada, Swamiji. And Maharaj was no exception. He fully joined the movement in July 1975 in Boston. In 1976, he was formally initiated, given the name Prabhupada Das. In 2013, he was awarded sannyas by his old associate Niranjan Swami. Maharaj is still endeavoring to expand Srila Prabhupada's. Maharaj is still endeavoring to expand Srila Prabhupada's glories around the world. He is now 74 years old. Before the COVID-19 restrictions, he often visited various countries in South America and the Caribbean.
I had my headphones on.
He was a Bhakti Shastri instructor in Vrindavan for several years until 2007. So we welcome His Holiness Bhakti Prabhupada-Vrata Damodara Maharaj. Hare Krishna. Maharaj, go ahead.
Okay, I can start to hear you now, but it's very, very softly.
Oh, you could hear us now. But you are kind of faint, Maharaj. You're very faint.
Right. I'll put my head. Okay, I assume this. I assume this is better. Sound?
Yes, much better, much better. We can hear you. Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Maharaj?
Is the sound coming through?
Yes.
Good. All right.
Can
No,
you
I
hear
can't
us?
hear you. I can't not hear you, but of course, of the headphones, I can't hear you for some reason. But anyway, at the end in the questions, I'll take the headphones off, and then I'll be able to hear you. But for now, I'll keep them on because you're saying it's too faint when I take the headphones off. So, all right. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada. Jai. So, in an elevator, probably in Radha Govinda Mandir, the devotees were trying to convince Srila Prabhupada, Radha Govinda Mandir, I'm talking about the 55th Street Temple, back in 1980 or 79. I lived there in 1980, in New York City. And the devotees were trying to please Prabhupada by inviting him to Hawaii, because Prabhupada had been traveling and traveling and traveling, and he was getting older, and they said, now you can rest and come to Hawaii, and you could, the mango season is on, and you can rest, and you can write your books, and you can, it'll be so nice, you know, and you please come to Hawaii, and we want to serve you there. So then Srila Prabhupada banged his cane on the, I think it was in an elevator, and he banged his cane on the floor. And he said, I want you to give me the privilege to die as Bhismadeva died on the battlefield. So this is what you call a spiritual warrior. They're talking about, of course, we associate that term with Bhakti Swami, but it certainly applies to Bhismadeva, and it certainly applies to Srila Prabhupada as well. He wanted the right, the privilege to die on the battlefield, and pretty much that's what he did. Although dying is a funny expression to use. So, or strange. So we'll talk a little bit about the appearance of Bhismadeva and how he got that name, which most of you know it inside out, but we'll just mention it. It's important. Bhismadeva is one of the Mahajans, and how does he fit in? His relationship with Krishna has everything to do with his status as Mahajan, one of the 12 all-time authorities for Vedic Vaishnava Siddhanta is the best way I can put it. Some of his main exploits, including how he got the name Bhismadeva, his expansive instructions to Yudhisthira. All right, don't worry, we won't have time to go into too much detail, but at least I'll read the verse that gives a sense of the scope of what he instructed to Yudhisthira. And then in the, I'll read some excerpts from the encyclopedia, Puranic encyclopedia, showing how Bhismadeva just was working often behind the scenes, but how he was participating, even though there may be long sections of the Mahabharata where you don't hear about Bhismadeva, but he's there, he's doing many things. And so that'll give us a sense of how he was participating and how he was a protagonist. He was the mover and shaker in a lot of what was going on. Of course, the ultimate mover and shaker is Krishna. And that's a very important principle. We hear it all the time, but it completely relates to how and why Bhismadeva and other personalities as well seem to display some human weakness or something short of perfection. And we'll get to that. So a little bit of the background. This is Bhismadeva's appearance. So how did he appear? His name was Deva-Vrata in his boyhood, and he is the 8th son of Shantanu, a king of the lunar dynasty, and his mother was, of course, Ganga Devi. This boy was the human embodiment of how do you pronounce it? Dyau, D-Y-A-U, Dyau. And he was the leader or the eldest of the Astavashus. Vashus is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 10. Vashunam Parvakashchasmi, of the Vashus I am fire. So these are actually fire gods. Very, very powerful. That has something to do with Bhismadev's incredible, we can say, material power, although it's ultimately spiritual. So many of you know the history here that in the heavenly regions, somehow we hear about Vasishtha Muni on earth, but we also hear about him in the heavenly realm. Or maybe somehow or another he was the ringleader. He was the one who actually stole the sacrificial cow from the great sage Vasishtha Muni. So Vasishtha Muni cursed the whole group of them, all the Astavashus, the 8 Vashus, to all have to become earthlings, take birth on earth as just human beings. Although it's a little bit like, the story, it's a fiction, but Superman, where he was born in Krypton, and he comes to Earth and he has Krypton power on Earth. So Bhismadeva had Vashu power from the heavenly abode, Vashu, one of the fire gods, and that has something to do with his incredible strength as a warrior, but even just physically so incredibly strong. He was so strong that Srila Prabhupada describes in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, text 10, in the purport. He said that Bhima, who is the brother of Hanuman, is no small timer. He's incredibly powerful. But Bhima is just like a fig. In other words, he's completely insignificant compared to Bhismadeva. So enough said. If that doesn't convince you of Bhismadev's incredible strength, I don't know what can. So they stole the cow, and then Vasishtha cursed them to come to earth. And that's a curse because it's a downgrade. It's a downgrade from the heavenly planets. And they pleaded. It always seems to happen every time there's a curse. The people being cursed, they always say, "Oh no, please, we're sorry. Don't make it a little bit easier for us." So Vasishtha Muni said, "Okay, 7 of you will just go to earth for a moment, hardly be there at all. And then one of you who actually stole, that's Dyau, Dyau stole the cow." Okay, that's a mnemonic device. Dyau is the one who stole the cow. So you'll have to stay on earth for a long, long time because you actually stole the cow. So that's the background, some of the background. Shantanu, his father, was the rebirth of another king, Mahabhishek. And Pradeep was the lunar king, apparently the same person who in the heavenly realm was Mahabhishek, and who was cursed by Lord Brahma along with Ganga Devi. So a lot of cursing going on here. Mahabhishek was cursed because there was some hanky-panky by glancing between Mahabhishek and Ganga Devi. They kind of were attracted to each other. And Lord Brahma, he didn't approve of that, so he cursed them that they'd have to come to earth as humans. The best I can understand from the encyclopedia, that's the Puranic encyclopedia, which, by the way, was approved pretty much by Gopi Pranadhana when I asked him personally about it. It was compiled by Vaitam Mani. So, and you can get it online. So this Pradeep apparently was the same Mahabhishek. So that's how he appeared as a human. He was also in the lunar dynasty. And Mahabhishek promised Ganga that she would become the wife of his son, Shantanu. So Mahabhishek came to earth. I believe this is true. I can't swear to it, but I believe he's the same personality as this Pradeep, who we hear about as the father of Shantanu, or the grandfather of Vrata, who would later become Bhismadeva. So this came to pass, but along with the rigid, wait a second. So yeah, so that happened. That what happened was that Ganga Devi saw, now that they were on earth now, and Ganga Devi used to hang around in the forest near her own river, and she was attracted to this Pradeep. So she goes and I mean, we can't imitate these things, but she went and she sits down on the right thigh of Pradeep. That's what very offensively Duryodhana wanted Draupadi to sit on his thigh, and that was bad news for him. He got his thigh broken later. But the thing is that Pradeep was very, very proper. He was performing austerities. He hadn't had a son, but then he would have a son, and he told Ganga, or Ganga Devi. Sometimes it said that when Ganga Devi was cursed and comes to earth, then she's known as Ganga instead of Ganga Devi. Either way, and then he said, "Well, you're sitting on my right thigh. That's the proper place to sit for a daughter-in-law, not for a wife. But you can become the wife of my son. You'll be my daughter-in-law." So that came to pass. She became the wife of Pradeep's son, and the name of Pradeep's son is the famous Shantanu. So then, you know what happened. Most of you know this. It's very famous. How Shantanu was in the forest and he saw Ganga Devi and he was very attracted. In the encyclopedia, Puranic encyclopedia, said it was love at first sight. So Shantanu wanted to marry Ganga Devi, and she still identified with her heavenly origins. And after all, she was Ganga Devi. So she said, "All right, but on one condition, don't cross me. Don't say anything that I don't like. Don't question anything that I do." He said, "Oh, that's all right. I'm willing to make that concession. That sounds all right." Well, it wasn't so all right, because every time they had a child, she drowned the child in her own river, in the Ganga. Now, remember that was a benediction. That was not bad. That was externally it looks terrible, but actually she was fulfilling the I don't know, consciously or unconsciously, I'm not sure, but she was fulfilling the concession made by Vasishtha Muni to the Vashus, that the first 7 of them would become released immediately from earthling status, and regain their Vasu status in heaven. So that's why. Now, it's very funny how people misinterpret things. There was a lady was writing in India Abroad, I believe it was. This is going back about 25 years at least. I was reading an article in that newspaper. It's in English. And she was saying that, just see, in the Vedic scriptures, abortion is perfectly all right. It's condoned in the Mahabharata. Not quite, madam. That's not the way it works. So that's how wild people can misinterpret things. Maybe she had some agenda there. We know that abortion is strictly forbidden. This you have to understand in the context of the history. So the last one, of course, was Vrata, and he was separated from his father for a while. But then, in Mahabharata, how the father was walking down the river, and all of a sudden the whole river was stopped. And he saw that there was a network of arrows that was stopping the river. And he said, who could have done this amazing thing? So to cut to the chase, it was his own son. So he was very happy to have his son with him. And they were living there. And Shantanu became attracted to, of course, Satyavati, the fisherman's daughter. And she didn't have a good fragrance because something about the way she was born, or because she was a fisher lady, she smelled like a fish, although she was very beautiful. So I guess it's like in the material world, you try to enjoy sweet rice with sand in it or something like that. Here you have this beautiful lady smell like a fish. So that was cured by none other than Parashara Muni, the father of Srila Vyasadeva. And that's how, when Shantanu met his new desired wife, Satyavati, she had a beautiful, beautiful fragrance. Because, as you know, that's why Vyasadeva is called, what's the name, how it works like that? Vaipayana Devas. That means was born on an island born. In the middle of the river, there was an island. And in that island, by his mystic power, Parashara Muni, he created a mist, like a fog, so they have some privacy. And he promised that her virginity would be restored. It's almost similar to what happened to Kunti Devi. And the offspring, of course, was none other than the one and only Srila Vyasadeva. And he told her, not only will you get your virginity restored, but you'll also smell very nice. You'll have a beautiful fragrance. No more fish aroma. You'll smell the best. So when Shantanu met her, she had no fish problem. She was really quite qualified. And he really wanted her to get his marriage, so he asked her father, Satyavati's father, and he said, no, why not? Because, my daughter won't have any royal status. She'll just become like a servant lady. She won't have any, because your progeny will take the throne. And so the father was very depressed. He went into seclusion in a room. He became really depressed, and almost like a little mode of ignorance there. So, although we shouldn't make this, like, Leela is a little different from, the Maya, or the modes of nature working, but it seemed like mode of ignorance. He became depressed. And his son saw, he asked the other people around his father, what's going on with my father? And he said, well, he wanted to marry someone. And so he spoke to his father, and I don't even think he spoke. I think he just went right away to the fisherman. And he said, my father really wants your daughter in marriage. He's a great king. He's fantastic. What's the problem? He said, no, because then you'll become the king instead of my daughter's children and or son. And he said, no, it's okay. I want to please my father. So what we'll do is I'll renounce the kingdom. Then he said, well, that won't work, because your children will have priority. What is that called? Primogenitor. They'll have priority over my grandchildren. So no way, no dice. So he said, in that case, I won't have any children. I won't marry. And he said, really? And he said Bhismadeva said it, Damodara said it in a very serious voice. And the flowers were being thrown from heaven and all that. And he got the name Bhismadeva, either right on the spot or after his father gave him that name. He goes to his father with Satyavati, and my dear father, here is the object of your love, of your desire. She is now your wife. You can now marry her. I got permission from her father. And how'd you do that? And he went through the whole story, and when he explained that he promised he would never marry, his father gave him a huge embrace. And actually, according to the encyclopedia, it was his father who gave him the name Bhismadeva, terrible vow. It was a wonderful vow in that he kept it, but it was a terrible thing for a Kshatriya to promise. And he kept it like anything, as we know from Mahabharata and Prabhupada explaining in purports in Bhagavatam also. So besides the name, he gave him a benediction that he could live as long as he wants to. He'll only leave the body when he feels like, when he desires to leave the body. So later on, that wouldn't happen, partially because of the curse of Vasishtha, and also because Bhismadeva had taken another vow, and he's very serious about his vows. His other vow was that he would always support whoever was on the Kuru throne, and he would take care to make sure that the Kuru dynasty doesn't become extinct. All right, so that's how Bhismadeva became Bhismadeva. And let's say a little bit about Bhishma in relationship to the Mahajans and Krishna as the supreme controller. During his class on Srimad Bhagavatam 1.8.46, Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu paraphrases, and I'm also, some of the other things I'm going to share with you, I also learned from hearing from Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu, much missed, that he paraphrases Srila Prabhupada in his class on Bhagavatam, first 1.8.46, that like Manu, Bhismadeva is one of the 12 Mahajans. This, of course, most of us already know. But a special detail was given by Srila Prabhupada, as recounted by Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu, namely that Bhishma was promised to attain a special Vaikuntha planet where Krishna as Parthasarathi presides. And you know Parthasarathi means Partha is Arjuna, and he's the chariot driver, the Sarathi of the driver of for Arjuna. And that was the vision that so inspired Bhismadeva, even at the time of his near death on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. He wanted to see, he was meditating on Krishna as Parthasarathi. So he actually is promoted to a special Vaikuntha planet where he'll always be able to envision Parthasarathi. This is very, very important point. This is pretty much, to me, the most important part of this presentation. That Krishna is always the supreme controller. There are gradations of his control, from indirect to more direct to very direct and very intimate and confidential. Excuse me, let me just take a sip of water. Indirect means that, I'm back again in the video. Indirect means that, like this material world, it's like a prison house. We hear Prakriti, Kriyamanani, Guna. We think we're the doers, but actually it's the modes of nature, material natures that do it. But who's controlling the modes of nature? Ultimately, Krishna. So Krishna is the supreme controller, but it's very indirect. When you're in the prison house, it's you're also serving the government very indirectly. The government is also controlling you, but through the laws of the prison house, not as a free man. So then, Maya Dakshina Prakriti Suyate Sacharacharam, that this material energy works under my directions. But the material energy is what's controlling so much. The regulatrix, as described by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Shristi, Stati, Palayasad, in other words, creation and maintenance and destruction, they all have a lot to do with Durga Devi, even though we usually relate her to the more destructive aspect. So at any rate, it's indirect. So through the material energy, Krishna is controlling. Prabhupada gives so many classes that you may not accept God, you want to be atheist, that's too bad for you, but you still have to accept that you're controlled by nature. Nobody could deny, even trying to exploit nature through technology or industry, whatever, but still we all admit that we're controlled by nature, we depend on nature for the air, even if you don't understand Maya Dakshina Prakriti, that by Krishna's glance, ultimately, the material nature is functioning. The three modes belong to him. So it's still indirect. But then when we get to these pastimes, and I'll mention three different instances very briefly, just identifying them. We have the case of Arjuna. We have the case of Yudhisthira Maharaj. And we have the case now of Bhismadeva. In all of these cases, if we don't understand that, if we don't understand that Krishna is the supreme controller and he made all these things happen, we'll blame these personalities. It's foolish, but we'll blame Arjuna for like a human weakness. I got flagged by saying it like that in a lecture one time. Actually, I was wrong in a sense. It wasn't really, he was just displaying it. It was a leela, Samavetan Kuruniti, that they're all kurus, Arjuna. Krishna was helping Arjuna go into that vishada, that depressed mood, because Krishna wanted that, so the Bhagavad Gita could be spoken, and then Krishna could emerge triumphant and pick up his Gandiva bow at the end very triumphantly. So that's the case of Arjuna. In the case of Yudhisthira, he also seemed to become too much obsessed with the mode of goodness, too much obsessed with Dharma, Uber alles. Yudhisthira Maharaj was so attached to Dharma that he wouldn't even follow Krishna's instruction. Krishna's beyond Dharma, and Krishna is the creator of Dharma. Vedaischa Sabar, Vedantik, etc., etc. I mean, Dharmaraj works for Krishna through Lord Vishnu. So it seemed like a weakness that Yudhisthira Maharaj, or before Maharaj, who was too attached to the mode of goodness, too attached to Dharma, so much so that he wouldn't tell a lie. I'm not going to repeat that incident because we don't have time, but most of you know that very, very well. It's iconic that Krishna wanted him to lie, that Ashwatthama is dead, and he wouldn't do it. And he only did it with a trick. So that seemed like, and then not only that, it gets better, or it gets worse, that Yudhisthira Maharaj also seemed to display a human weakness, too attached to Dharma after the Battle of Kurukshetra, where Krishna, the whole idea of the Battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna planned it just so that Yudhisthira would become Yudhisthira Maharaj, that he would become, although he was already the king in Indraprastha, but that he would become the emperor of the world. that had a lot to do with why Krishna arranged, also to get rid of the miscreants, etc. But so many millions of men died that Yudhisthira Maharaj was so guilty. He felt so guilty. He became like Arjuna, Vishada, depressed. He didn't want to even ascend the throne. It helped a little bit when Krishna advised him to perform some Ashwamedha sacrifice. But he was still very reluctant to take the throne. That, oh, so many men died just for me. So that seems like a weakness, because Krishna arranged the battle of Kurukshetra for Yudhisthira to take the throne. And now Yudhisthira is, no, I'm not going to. Just like Arjuna, now Yotche, I'm not going to fight. Now Yudhisthira is saying, no, I'm not going to take the throne. So that seems like not pure devotion. It seems like too much dharma, and not enough bhakti. So, and then we have the case of Bhismadeva himself. And we can't help but remember, Bhismadeva was so ideal, so powerful, but he ends up on the wrong side with Duryodhana. Has something to do with his vow that he would support whoever sits on the Kuru throne. He remained silent when Draupadi was about to be disrobed. That's called the vicious assembly, the Asat Sabha. The vicious assembly, recalled by Queen Kunti. What else can we find fault with Bhismadeva? There are other things that may seem not quite cricket, not quite correct. All these cases were all by the desire of the Lord. In the case of Bhismadeva, who we're focusing on this evening, Bhismadeva wanted to, Krishna wanted Bhismadeva to be the one to glorify Bhismadeva. Krishna wanted him to be the one to, oh, now I see all kinds of wonderful devotees here. Okay, Hare Krishna. Except myself, I'm not so wonderful. He wanted Bhismadeva to be the one to instruct. In other words, Yudhisthira was not ready to hear Krishna's instruction, and there was also some other very powerful personalities that were trying to induce Yudhisthira to take the throne and to rule the earth. He wouldn't do it. So it shows the power of Bhismadeva, and Krishna was behind that. In other words, Yudhisthira's reluctance to hear from others was Krishna's arrangement that Bhismadeva would be glorified, Mahajan, by being the one that would encourage Yudhisthira to take the throne, and also give him so many instructions. You want Dharma? Yudhisthira, we got Dharma. Actually, he was, according to Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu, he was preaching more on the level of Artha Shastra, which is lesser than Dharma Shastra. But wherever Artha or Dharma Shastra, but you got it. You want it, you'll get it. And Bhismadeva was able to give him, it says that 300 chapters of the Mahabharata is all devoted to Bhismadeva's instruction to Yudhisthira. That's how thorough it was. And of course, Bhismadeva is glorified by his amazing heroic feat. He was there about 3 weeks lying on a bed of arrows. That means dozens of arrows piercing his body all over. And that formed a bed, and he's lying on the bed of arrows. And he was just left there by himself. And then they all came to see him, even Duryodhana and Krishna. And that fulfilled his desire to leave the body. Externally, his desire was to leave the body in the constellation of Uttara. But actually, Uttarayana, something like that. But actually, it should be taken another way. It's to leave the constellation, to leave this body when, to leave his body in the presence, not just of the constellation, but of that person who was in Uttara, which is Krishna, when he entered the womb of Uttara to save Maharaj Parikshit. Of course, the body was burnt, actually, but he immediately replaced it with an identical body, an embryo, we can say, or fetus. And that's how, that was in the 7th chapter of first canto of Bhagavatam, and of course in Mahabharata. So in all three cases, Krishna was making the arrangements that Bhismadeva should be glorified, that Bhagavad Gita should be spoken, that Yudhisthira should fall into this little bit of subtle type of Maya there, although it was pretty obvious it was wrong not to obey Krishna. So all these things were arranged by the Lord. Yudhisthira's obsession with Dharma was so extreme that he preferred to follow conventional Dharma rather than obey Krishna. That's how far it went. So, okay. So getting back to Bhismadeva, Krishna fulfilled Bhismadeva's great desire to have his darshan, Krishna's darshan, during his final days on the bed of arrows, up to seeing Krishna just as he leaves his body. And Bhismadeva expressed so much emotion. Why do the Pandavas, why are they suffering so much? He was so well, you know, again, is that a weakness? No, he's very attached. To be attached to devotees is nice, despite Bhagavad Gita instruction, Asochan and Asochan, all that. So, remember that Shantanu had given his son Deva-Vrata, now Bhismadeva, the benediction that he could leave his body only at his own will. So he used that to wait for Uttarayana, for Krishna, by that name, to be there. Okay, I won't go into too much of this. How do Kshatriyas relate to Bhakti? That gets a little too academic or detailed. So Bhismadeva's instructions to Yudhisthira were that there's a verse 1.9.27 in Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm sorry, I'm using the phone, I'm holding it, so as I move my hand, my head bounces all around. What can I do? Try not to move my hand so much. Here's the translation. He then explained by divisions the acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king, and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees, both briefly and extensively. 1.9.27. Last, I'd like to refer to the Quranic encyclopedia, the affairs of the kingdom in crisis. Two sons named Vichitravirya and Chitrangada were born to Satyavati by Shantanu. Besides this is not Ganga anymore, this is Satyavati. So Vichitravirya and Chitrangada, and they died shortly afterwards because, we don't have time for the detail. Chitrangada had the same name as a Gandharva, and the Gandharva didn't like it. They had a long, long fight, and eventually Chitrangada, the earthling, was killed, was defeated and killed. And the other one, Vichitravirya, he died of consumption. which is a polite way of saying he became just too involved with sense gratification, and his energies became dissipated, and so there was a crisis, how to continue. And then we know how it was, Bhismadeva was approached by his mother, Satyavati, and I want to make sure I got that right. No, good. No, Satyavati is the mother of Vyasadeva. She first she tried to convince Bhismadeva to procreate, but Bhismadeva would not break his vow. So then Srila Vyasadeva came to his mother as he had promised whenever she needed him, and then she told Vyas to, and he did it. And you know the story with Ambika and Ambalika, and it resulted in Dhritarashtra, and then Pandu, and then finally the maidservant with Vyasadeva. They engendered Vidura. So anyway, all these things were going on. It was Bhishma who performed the funeral rites of King Chitraganda, and etc., etc. And so many things happened. And what I'm going to do now is let me just finish by reading a. Let me get back here again. Just take a moment. Here it is. Okay. So Bhismadeva was the chief protagonist in all these events, even though he seemed like a little behind the scenes sometimes. At every stage in the story, we see Bhishma's influence, as described in the encyclopedia. The main events in which this Superman used to give shelter to Kauravas and Pandavas alike played a decisive role. So there's a list of 34 incidents. Now, this is like a quick bird's eye, quick summary of not all, but some of the activities of Bhismadeva. Number one, he sent a messenger to Subal, king of Gandhara, to ask for the hand of Gandhari to be married to Dhritarashtra. That's how much senior Bhishma was. He went to the palace of Shalya, the king of Madra, and secured Madri to be married to Pandu. So even though Bhismadeva would not marry and would remain strictly celibate, but for the good sake of the dynasty, he didn't hesitate to be a matchmaker, you might say, or arrange these marriages, as we're hearing. He brought about the marriage between Vidura and the daughter of Devaka. So many marriages he arranged. The Maharshis, who were the inhabitants of Satashringa, told Bhishma about the birth of the Pandavas. That's something else. Bhishma offered Jalanjali, worship with holy water, to Pandu after his death. He performed the death anniversary of Pandu. He engaged Dronacharya to teach archery to the princes. So that was Bhismadeva that made that happen. Ultimately, Krishna made everything happen, but Bhismadeva is the instrument for Krishna and the protagonist in so many areas. He advised Duryodhana to give half the kingdom to the Pandavas. Duryodhana, of course, did not agree. He had taken part in Dharmaputra's Rajasuya Yajna. That means Yudhishthira's Rajasuya Yajna. Yudhishthira had entrusted to Bhishma the arrangements for that yajna. He advised Yudhishthira to give the highest place of honor in that yajna to Sri Krishna. We hear that Sahadeva was selecting, but Bhismadeva also had a role in that choice. Bhishma ridiculed Shishupal. And then Shishupal insulted Bhishma. Well, that's tit for tat. Bhishma stopped Bhima, who rushed out to kill Shishupal. That was during the Rajasuya. It was Bhishma who narrated the life story of Shishupal. In the battle against Shishupal, Bhishma selected powerful kings to help Sri Krishna. Once Bhishma asked the sage Pulastya about the value and importance of pilgrimage. This is number 18. Bhishma advised Duryodhana to be on friendly terms with the Pandavas. Again, didn't work. In the battle which was fought by the Kauravas against King Virat, Bhishma arranged the regiments in order after sending Duryodhana to Hastinapura. That's the whole story. A grim fight took place between Arjuna, who went to help the Virat army. That was when they were in exile, the Pandavas, and then they were in incognito, and then this battle took place. And Bhishma, at last it was the charioteer who removed Bhishma. I don't get that one. Who had fallen down unconscious from the battlefield. That sounds anomalous, but Leela. When the Kauravas were contemplating to fight against the Pandavas, who had returned after their incognito life, Bhishma ridiculed Karna. What you missed was a list I was reading from the Puranic encyclopedia of how Bhismadeva was so instrumental, and there's so many incidents of Bhismadeva interacting with Duryodhana, interacting with the Pandavas, interacting, just performing sacrifice and instructing, and he was very, very active, and it's not like he just sat there. So I'm really sorry that you missed that whole list. It was probably pretty boring.
Can you hear us, Maharaj?
Sikendra agrees it was very boring, and I'm sure it was. But no, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. I have the headphones on. Let me see what happens if I take these off. Say something now, please.
Can you hear us?
Sikendra?
Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you. Yeah, you're loud as anything.
We should have done that earlier, Maharaj.
Start all over again. Yeah, next time I'll just see. The reason that I didn't, the famous laugh, the reason I didn't use the computer was because it depends on the Wi-Fi, and I didn't want to have to go in the other room where other devotees are there. So I'm just staying in my room with the phone. But next time I won't do this anymore. I'll do it like this, and if the signal gets too weak, I'll just walk into the other room close to the modem. Maybe there's some cure for that, but that's the best way to do it. So I'm really sorry about that dead time. That's not cool at all. So I get a lot of points boost to that. So anyway, Ki Jai, Mahajan Bhismadeva Ki Jai, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, and with all the Vaishnavas, kindly forgive my foolishness. So now we're supposed to have some questions and answers. Maybe one of the questions will be, what did you try to tell us? But I'll let you ask that if you want to. I'm not going to impose.
Yeah.
I mean, I can use some of the questions and answers, unless someone really wants to get into it. I can use some of the question and answer time to reread that list so you can hear it now that I'm on.
Yeah.
Otherwise, let's hear from some of you. Let's be more interactive. I'm getting a sign saying your internet connection is unstable.
Yeah.
But we'll see. As long as you can hear me okay, I won't worry about that. If it gets bad, if I start breaking up, I'll go in the other room if I have to. So do we have any comments or questions or complaints or anything?
It appears, Maharaj, that Bhismadeva was, some question often comes up, why did Bhismadeva, being a Mahajan, had to take, who's completely conversant with the principles of devotional service and with the most
Okay, I'll
dharmic.
tell you what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the other room because it's breaking up.
Yeah.
One moment. Let's take off this thing. And now I have the touchpad is enabled. I unplug the mouse. I unplug the charger from the computer, and I feel like I'm carrying you all into the other room, just like Bhima Singh was carrying all the Pandavas in.
You're carrying us to the spiritual world, Maharaj.
Well, yeah, in one sense, because my darshan here of Sri Gaurnath in the main room. We're moving from this house, but we'll get another nice house. I'm sorry, but I have to give a class here because it didn't work any other way. Can I use that table and put the... Yeah, let me show you if you can see it. This is deities here. Can you see the Gaurnath deity? All right. Anyway, let me just put this on the table. And can you help me with the chair, or I can use this one? Don't all leave. There you go. All right, how are we doing now? Haribol?
Yes.
You okay now, right? Okay, could you repeat your question once again?
So Bhismadeva being a Mahajan, we are taught as devotees that we should really be careful about who we associate with and the opinions we take, swayed by various things. So it appears that Bhismadeva kind of flawed in this area of being on the side of Duryodhan, and Prabhupada, I think, even mentions at some point because they were maintained, I can't remember, paraphrasing, by Duryodhan, they could not speak up. So I mean, of all persons, Bhismadeva knew everything. So why that awkward position he took?
Yeah, okay, well, I don't know if I think this part of the class was transmitted, adequately. Maybe you might recall that I was trying to emphasize the most important principle that's coming out in all these descriptions is that Krishna is the supreme controller. And I was pointing out, I think this part of the class was going smoothly, that he controls everything indirectly for the fallen conditioned souls, but he also controls more directly with his more intimate devotees. Like Prabhupada in an interview, the Rameshwar Swami was telling the reporter that, well, it's true, Prabhupada, he becomes, but Krishna speaks to him through his heart, and that's how he knows everything. And Prabhupada said, who told you that? Directly. So in other words, the control is the more intimate the devotee, the more closer the control. So the apparent lapses of Arjuna, I'll say it again because it's so important, this principle. The apparent all too human side of Arjuna when he became kind of sentimental. The too human side of Yudhisthira when he became too dharmic. He preferred dharma over surrendering to Krishna and obeying Krishna's will. He became, by the way, are there still any, there's still several participants?
Yeah.
He became the apparent lapse of Bhismadeva that you're mentioning, that he ends up on the wrong side. all these things are not actually objective defects in the personality. They only reflect the arrangements of Krishna, so different pastimes are enacted and take place. In the case of Arjuna, his vishada, his depression, resulted in the speaking of Bhagavad Gita. Where would we be without Bhagavad Gita? In the case of Yudhisthira, it was a glorification of Bhismadeva, because Krishna couldn't convince Yudhisthira. Now that may look bad for Yudhisthira, but Krishna arranged that Yudhisthira would fall into this sattvic maya, maya of being so dharmic that he prefers maya, that's why he wouldn't lie. He prefers dharma over bhakti, over just pure devotion to Krishna. Gopis had no problem like that. And it applies to Bhismadeva, as we just mentioned, in the same way. Whatever lapses, I think the most terrible accusation we would dare make against Bhismadeva, Mahajan. How could a Mahajan be sitting there and having Draupadi, an innocent person, being disrobed in front of all the seniors of the Kuru assembly? That's pretty heavy. Even that was arranged because it was particularly that incident that was like the last straw. I mean, that's when Bhimashen made those vows, and I mean, it was just necessary to provoke that the battle of Kurukshetra should take place. So, and if we see some fault in the battle of Kurukshetra, then we have to look at the mission of the Lord. Yada yada hi dharmasya gnani, etc. Anyway, that's my answer.
But we also see was Bhishmadev conscious during all this time that he was adharmic? That's another question. When he was on the side of Duryodhana.
Well, in one sense, he was that he was fulfilling his vows and holding whoever was sitting on the throne. And actually, Duryodhana was a good administrator. His people were happy, actually. He just had a problem that he was not a devotee. Serious problem, which makes him almost a maniac, you might say. But no, they couldn't. They weren't just like getting up on a stage and just acting. Even Krishna himself, when he starts crying, when Mother Yasoda at him with the whipping, he's actually allowing himself to be overcome by this yoga maya and feel that. Otherwise, what would be the fun for Krishna if Mother Yasoda was feeling all these emotions and he was just play acting? He wasn't just making it up, pretending. No, he allows him to have that exchange. So in this similar point there, in that these devotees, all that the three that I mentioned, Arjuna, Yudhisthira, Bhismadeva, they weren't just saying, hey, I know that Krishna wants to act like this, so that therefore the battle of Kurukshetra will take place, or Bhagavad Gita should be spoken, or that Krishna will be glorified. So I'll just pretend that I'm in Maya. No, they actually feel what they really feel that way. Yudhisthira actually gets that feeling, and that feeling may seem something short of Krishna consciousness, seem like an imperfection, but Krishna wanted him to be overcome. It's like Bhagavad Gita. Yatecha, what is it? Kuruni, Samaveta Kuruniti. Just see, O Arjuna, here there's Kurus. On one side, there's Kurus on the other side. Now you're taking a look. What are you going to do now? Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to get depressed and I'm not going to fight. Tan samiksha sakinteya van bandhana vastitam kripaya pariyana idam idam ablavik. And then Arjuna becomes depressed. Arjuna wasn't just pretending he was depressed. So I don't know if someone has a different realization about this, they can say, but I mean, when I was preparing for this class about Bhismadeva, I had what you call like a little realization, and it kind of opened my eyes to a whole aspect of Leela, that and how Krishna is the supreme controller. But as I was mentioning, control is more direct, like this intimate devotion, but not in a manipulative sense. It happens emotionally. It happens. It's rasa. It just takes place so nicely. Anyway, thank you for raising the question. It gave me a chance to repeat what I consider the most important thing. And again, I'm. This is not Leela. This is just foolishness that I was muted all that time. Arjuna becomes mute in Babuvaha, Tushnim Babuva, Ukva Tushnim Babuvaha. I mean, he becomes mute. That's not the same mute that I'm becoming. I'm not mute like Arjuna was. All right. Thank you. Is anyone else? Are we completely out of time? We have time for one or two other questions.
Yeah, we have some time.
All right. If anyone else would like.
Can we say that Bhishma showed that any position you are, you can serve Krishna? I mean, seemed like Bhishma was entangled with Duryodhana, but his devotion shone through, and his service attitude. In other words, it seemed like there's no perfect position in the material world. So it seemed like he was demonstrating that whatever our position, we can perform a pure service.
I want to try to, if I can use that word, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but sort of add something to what you're saying. That Bhismadeva never lost his devotion. And Krishna's devotees, the Pandavas. One of the things I mentioned, which you may or may not have heard because of my foolishness, is that the Krishna told that Pandavas told somebody that Pandavas should not be killed and Shikandi should not be killed. Two very different reasons, and I mentioned the Pandavas out of love. Finally, he told Duryodhana, "Yeah, okay, I'll kill all the Pandavas." But Krishna didn't let that happen. I mean, the point is that Bhismadeva was, Duryodhana can see that Bhismadeva is partial towards the Pandavas. So that shows that Bhismadeva couldn't go the whole 9 yards, just like one of Duryodhana's men. He wasn't ready to do that because of his devotion to the Lord and the Lord's devotee. Does that make sense, Sarvabhauma Prabhu?
I think so, yeah. Yes.
It's okay. All right. All right. Well, if there are no other questions,